Hello, my name is Ambrose, and welcome to my channel. Today we are going to be discussing Bartok, and particularly Bartok as he relates to ethnomusicology and the evolution of ethnomusicology. So if you don't know Bartok's work, I would recommend checking it out in general. A very interesting 20th century composer, born 1881, died 1945. In what we know now as Hungary. I'll show you a map here in a little bit. Things are a little bit more split up than they are now. So, why I got into this, what were my initial questions? Number one, where is the convergence of Hungarian folk song and Bartok's own invention? How closely were things directly quoted? That kind of thing. And what was the ultimate influence of Hungarian, Romanian, and Slovakian folk music on Bartok's music as a whole? What did he take from it? How did he incorporate it? Okay, a little bit about Hungary. So Hungarian history from 1848 to 1945. They had the Hungarian Revolution in 1848 through 1849. Hungary fought to gain independence from Austria. So there was a nationalist Hungarian movement that was rejecting the Germanic influences. So by the 1900s, there was a huge national movement, not only in Hungary, but now in Germany and elsewhere. And then if you want to go a little back further than that, too, we can get into the nationalism of the Russian composers of the late 1800s. Mussorgsky and Rimsky-Korsakov, the Great Five, people like that. So this is the map I wanted to show you. It's a little difficult, but around Bartok's time here on the left, much larger states. We have Austria, Hungary, Romania, Serbia, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire stretching down, dealing with a little bit of indigenous folk tunes from this region as well. Fast forwarding to today, more or less, we now have Romania. Sorry, it's still a little bit hard to see. Serbia, Bulgaria, Bosnia, Macedonia, and now Turkey, Ukraine. So just want to give you a little bit of context, because what we'll be talking about, if I say Romanian folk songs, it may not be exactly the exact spot we're talking about, but just to give you a frame of reference, this whole Eastern European, Mediterranean area we'll be looking at here. Okay, so what types of songs would you expect to find on these kind of endeavors? So we're mainly talking about sheep herders, swine herders, and farmers. And what do you typically find in really any culture? Wedding songs, harvest songs, mourning songs, probably some kind of solstice song. So as we move forward, what I'm primarily working off of is a collection of Bartoks that is, I believe, simply titled Romanian Folk Songs, but it's part of a set. Romanian Folk Songs, Romanian Folk Dances, and Romanian Folk Lyrics, maybe? I can't remember, but there's a set of three of them. These are the peoples that we are primarily dealing with, and we'll kind of dig further here in a minute. But this, if you can see on the left, this is a wedding processional, a little bit hard to make out, and on the right we just have a the local flute and the violin, or perhaps they would think of it more as fiddle. What were the musical characteristics that Bartok found or got interested in his endeavors? And this is, again, through Hungary, Slovakia, Romania. So the common modes that he found were Lydian, Dorian, Phrygian, and Aeolian. All right, so let's back up 1 second, just to make sure this is real clear. I figure if I'm doing this, I might as well try to give you a little bit music theory and history along the way. So the Lydian mode is a major scale with a raised fourth. So sounds like this. That's Lydian, opposed to C major. Okay, so the Lydian is a raised fourth. You get this sound? So you hear that in Simpsons, Leonard Bernstein's Maria from West Side Story, Green Day, pop music all the time. So you can use that for a little bit of added color when you're working in major scales. Dorian. A good way to keep track of some of this stuff is if you know anything about the keyboard and you work on a piano, and you look at C, and from all the white notes, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, that'll give you the major scale. If you just kind of bump things up and start on the D, and play all the white notes, you get a different order of whole steps and half steps, and what you wind up with is, in this particular case, the Dorian mode. So what that is it is it's a minor mode with a raised sixth. So typically in this D minor, we would be having the B flat. In Dorian, we raise the sixth, so now we have the B natural. It takes some of the harshness out of the minor scale, and I find it works well for medium music. If you want something that is somewhat minor, but you don't want it brooding and dissonant in your face, you can kind of use that sixth scale degree to soften something. Opposed to that Phrygian, moving up the keyboard again, starting on E, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E. In E minor, you would have an F sharp. But in Phrygian, we're going to lower that second scale degree. So now you have E to F natural. You get that minor second right at the beginning of the scale, it just adds a whole nother level of dissonance. So, you can use that in a lot of different aggressive ways here. And then Aeolian is what we think of as minor. So if you start on A on the keyboard and play all the white notes, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, that is just your minor scale. Okay. He also found that these peoples used heavy use of the pentatonic scale. Kind of a gentle scale. You hear that a lot in Eastern music and other indigenous cultures. Okay, and then we also have a little variant here, the Hungarian scale. So it's C, D, E flat. So what's nice about that is you get this little chromatic 3-note run. A flat, G, F sharp. And then you also get the B to C, which is basically the harmonic minor scale, where you have that jump. Another interesting characteristic he found was there's a great variety in the tempi of a single piece, meaning the same piece would be played at almost twice the speed. You see here below, I'm marking 86 to 138, that's BPM, 92 to 120, 96 to 186, so that's literally doubling the speed of the piece, 138 to 195. So just to put that in context, if you think of your favorite pop song or the national anthem or whatever, and you double it, it's going to completely change the quality of that piece. But for whatever reason, he found that to be a common practice throughout Hungary. And then the Hungarian rhythms, this is going to be important. It's basically odd groupings, 2s and 3s and 4s and 5s and 7s. And so we're going to hear that directly moving into Bartok's music. There's so much of that in there. Okay, probably the kind of instruments you would guess: violin, fiddle, the peasant flute. I suppose that's pronounced fluer. Long flutes with and without finger holes, bagpipes, Jew's harp, the Alp horn or alpenhorn. And this is interesting here. The Alp horn is a professional implement of shepherding life. Shepherds are mostly women and girls in this area. Men have as their main occupation, other than field work, the manufacture of wooden utensils. Bartok had a real problem with what he called so-called Hungarian music. So my understanding is that verbonkos music is 19th century Hungarian music. The main place I've seen it is at military processionals, saber dance type material. So that's kind of the foundation of it, but other than that, I don't know quite how to dig into that traditional music. But I suppose my understanding would be that that type of music influenced this type of music that Bartok was not too fond of. I'm going to pull up Brahms, the Hungarian Dance Number 5 here, and to understand why he may have composed this piece, Brahms himself, it's my understanding that in his youth he was performing in bars and taverns, and probably not the most savory of places, where he would have been exposed to the Gypsy culture, kind of in Germany, but there would have been influences that he picked up on in his youth, and I believe that's why he would have composed a couple of these Hungarian pieces. If you're familiar with Bartok's music, I think you could be able to spot why he was unhappy with that pretty quickly. It's almost like he's just taking that Hungarian gypsy flair, and it's like that's the main course. Like there's nothing really underneath it. It's just kind of you're grabbing this Hungarian flavor and just kind of, I don't know, just putting it out for the virtuosity of it, rather than taking the entire Hungarian cultures and incorporating that into how you actually go about composing. Maybe this is a little unclear what I'm getting at, but let me show you one more, the Liszt Hungarian Rhapsody number 2, and hopefully it'll just become a little bit more clear as we move on to Bartok himself. So hopefully you can kind of see the similarities between those two. They're utilizing things like the harmonic minor scale and the gypsy scales and that kind of, you know, flashy Hungarian gypsy music. But again, I feel like there's nothing really underneath it. So Bartok refused to consider Erkel and even Liszt, who was Hungarian, by the way, as Hungarian art music. And Kodai, who we'll get into, Zoltán Kodai, agreed that they failed to develop a national style, particularly when you consider that around this same time period, you have the Russian school of the five, who have completely created a national style, and they're right next door. So that may be Bartok's concern over pieces like this. All right, now we have to talk about Bartok, Kodai, and the Gramophone. Bartok met Zoltán Kodai in 1905 at the Royal Academy of Music in Budapest, where Kodai was working as a graduate student on his dissertation, The Stanza Structure of Hungarian Folk Song. So obviously he had an interest in this as well, and probably turned Bartok onto it in a deeper sense in their years schooling together. Kodai introduced Bartok to the gramophone as an academic instrument. This would have been the first time in history where you have something where you can really get detailed notes on audio. It just didn't exist. So with the use of the gramophone, Kodai and particularly Bartok really pioneered ethnomusicology as its own discipline. So Bartok begins his ethnomusicology research. In 1905, he was awarded a grant to study rural villages in Transylvania. Over the course of the next 30 years, Bartok collected thousands of folk songs from Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, Serbia, Bulgaria, from the Turks, and from the Arabs in Algeria. He collected thousands of folk song lyrics, documented dances from rural villages, including the choreography. And again, going back to those texts that I introduced at the beginning, those are a treasure trove of all of these things. How much of Bartok's work is direct quotations, and how much of it is Bartok being Bartok? This is a field recording that Bartok took in the early 20th century. It's a junky recording, but it's certainly well enough to do accurate transcriptions from, so that must have been a lifesaver. Now we check out what Bartok did with that. All right, so right off the bat, we can tell that's a direct quotation, but he does expand on it, and obviously the orchestration is a big part of it. And I don't want to underemphasize that, because orchestration was how he thought of ways to push Hungarian music forward. There's a lot of ways that we can, kind of push the envelope, and orchestration is certainly one of them. We can push the envelope today. We can take that same original folk tune and arrange it for, 12 electric guitars and a bassoon, and that would be something. You'd still be creating art out of art. And Bartok certainly did that. And it may have even been one of his steps progressing from understanding Hungarian music to really, really having it be the undercurrent that holds all of his music together. Okay, so I'm just going to play a few of these folk tunes straight out of that text that I keep referencing. I'm just going to play number 1 up here. It's a very quick little MIDI mock-up, nothing special, but just to give you an idea of what he was compiling. Alright, so just a simple melody. I added a little bit of drums just for the heck of it. And again, going back to orchestration, we can bring things to life by reorchestrating them. That little Alp horn, I was just trying to make a little pastoral little influence there. Working off number 4 here. Bartok's research. So Bartok, fell in love with ethnomusicology, no longer merely as an inspiration for music making, but as a new field of creative endeavor. He pioneered ethnomusicology as fieldwork, and his ability to speak different dialects all over that region made a big difference. He was able to take really good notes. He was a fastidious note taker. I picture him almost as Darwin, out in the woods, taking pictures of not taking pictures, but drawing the dances and in Darwin's case it'd be the flora and fauna and that kind of thing. But definitely a researcher mind. At this point, he's not just a musician; he is definitely a researcher, and the sheer number of how much stuff he collected, I mean, it's incredible. I mean, if you think what his orchestral output would have been if you hadn't done that, it might have been doubled. But that's not to say that would have been better. I mean, he did a lot to pioneer ethnomusicology, and that's equally, if not more important than his orchestral output, which is phenomenal. He created classification systems, transcription systems, revived interest in rural music, and the importance of the pentatonic scale, which we kind of touched on, just because we see it in so many ethnic, indigenous cultures. I'm just going to read a couple of quotes here, and I'll have the links. And I'll have the citations hopefully at the end of the presentation here. I'll double check that. But these were the things that when I was investigating this stuff, they really helped to tie all this stuff together and make me understand, I get where he's coming from now. Bela Bartok birthed the field of ethnomusicology as an academic discipline. Through his tireless pursuits of folk music, his revelation of the sound of the rural people, and his incorporation of folk style into his own personal compositions, his work revealed to the world that folk music exists, is important, and that its study stands as an independent academic discipline. In Why and How Do We Collect Folk Music, Bartok observed, folk music is not an individual art, but essentially a collective manifestation. So I think that may tie into why he was so disappointed in the previous pieces I played, Brahms and Liszt. Not those in particular, but as an example, I picked those pieces because, I mean, again, that music is not a collective manifestation of Hungarian culture. It's just trite, if you will. It's taking a cliche from the culture and using that rather than understanding what this folk music is all about. The subject being folk music, I made my collections exclusively from peasants and from people who either were an essential part of the village community life or else fitted musically into this life by functions which gave them importance in it. Gypsy violin players, as example. Gypsies living in villages are completely assimilated musically according to the type of people among which they live. Therefore, there is no reason to exclude them. The gypsies he's speaking of. Now we are getting into how Bartok wants to incorporate these elements deeper into his music. Bartok wrote to his sister, "I have now a new plan. I shall collect the most beautiful Hungarian folk songs and raise them to the level of art song by providing them with the best possible piano accompaniment." So already we're talking about orchestration, and we're potentially talking about reharmonization. Totally easy to do if you have a simple melody like whatever he's gathering, and you have the entire piano to manipulate that melody. I mean, the possibilities are endless. There's an important difference, however, between merely understanding a fact to be true and being able to incorporate that truth into a new creation. That might be the highlight of this whole presentation here. Similarly, even though Bartok knew his folk music style of Hungary, a period of time elapsed before he composed his own masterpieces in the folk style. It's almost as if he had to marinate in that culture and before he could truly incorporate it into his works. The discovery of folk music liberated Bartok from not only the stylized gypsy music of the contemporary popular entertainment, but also from the forms and restrictions of 19th century classical music. As Bartok moved away from Germanic post-Romantic ideals, Bartok experimented with different ways to harmonize folk melodies, drawing influence from a wide range of cultures. The difficulty was arranging the original folk song without distorting or obscuring the innate nature of the music. In general, there is a rejection of this Germanic school of music. And people trying to figure out different ways to be creative, write good concert music, without being kind of pigeonholed into this Germanic school of thought. So Bartok is going to look elsewhere. I think we're going to get into it in the next slide, but so as Bartok is rejecting the post-Romantic Germanic school, he's looking, back in time. He's looking to the Renaissance, the Baroque, All right. In his later years, Bartok internalized the folk music elements to a degree where they became inseparable from the texture of his compositions, and as a consequence, he refrained from using direct folk music quotations. So we're seeing that as he evolves as a composer and a ethnomusicologist, he's using less and less direct quotations and just writing music that is, at its core, Hungarian. In his later years, he drew inspiration from music from the 14th through 17th century, inspired by forms which were less constrained. Other composers of the 20th century changed their style over time. Bartok never lost folk song as the center of his compositional style. Rather, he took bits and pieces of several styles and molded them all into one multifaceted, greater style. I'm going to show you a few of Bartok's later works, actually in chronological order, 1918, 1926, and 1945, trying to give you an idea of how this stuff fully gets incorporated over time. couple things to notice. We have groupings 2s, 3s, and then 5s. We have bars of 3/8 interrupting 2/4 seems to be the general time signature. Thought I saw one more back here. 3/4. Yep, 3/4 to 3/8 to 2/4. So it's mixing meters here. Looks like it starts in 3/4. I think that one sounds fairly Hungarian. It sounds like a folk song. It doesn't sound too different than the ones that we checked out on the Gramophone recording. And again, that's 1918. That's fairly early. So let's see where he goes from there. All right, so I'm hearing some advancement in his composition in general, but it still sounds Bulgarian and Hungarian to me. I think it's nothing like the folk music, but it's definitely in there. All right, that piece was from the Mikrokosmos, which, if you don't know, is a piano pedagogy series written by Bartok. I believe it's in 6 volumes. They're very thin piano pedagogy, so they start with very basic ideas. It gets harder and harder and harder and harder and very hard by the end. All right, so hopefully you can see that everything is fully incorporated at that point. I mean, it's true concert work, but there's just something Hungarian in its bones. So I would highly recommend checking out Bartok in general. I mean, it's kind of hard to go wrong. I think I like his piano concertos and his violin sonatas the best, but really any of it. Here's my reference page if you had questions about any of the material I used. So, with all of that being said, I think we're all done. If you like what you see, please like and subscribe. Feel free to share the videos. And I will see you on the next one. Thanks.